Ready?
Shaney,
All right.
take it away.
This meeting and all other meetings of this committee are open to the public. Proper notice has been posted and given to the press in accordance with Wisconsin statutes, so the citizenry may be aware of the time, place, and agenda of this meeting. Call to order.
A roll call. Appleby?
Here.
Rasmussen?
Here,
Edwards is not present. Okay.
Next is to approve the minutes from September 17th, 2014.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from September 17th, 2014.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
There you go.
The next item on is citizen appearance. Nobody's here. Next is discussion on possible action on chapter A 600- fee schedule.
But one thing that we'll take a look at just for tonight is in reviewing our approved rates through the Public Service Commission, through the Water Department, or the Water Utility. You will see on page number, well, I guess we'll go in order. Page number 1 is the actual chapter A600, our fees. In the ordinance 55-1, this is the fee schedule. It's check, if somebody would send us a check that's returned for insufficient funds. The ordinance says we charge them $20. The approved rates with the water utility are for an NSF charge, we should be charging $25 on an NSF, which is pretty standard, I believe, $25. The request would be to modify the ordinances because you're able to do that a lot more easily than having to go through the Public Service Commission to get the $25 amount modified if you want to do that. So it's probably best, the recommendation would be to modify chapter A600-1 and the fee for chapter 55-1 would be to modify it to $25 for an NSF fee. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay.
Is that the only one?
That would, well, it's the only one for right now. That's the obvious one with the water right now. There are a couple other fees that we should probably be taking a look at in the ordinances. There's some fees that aren't specifically listed, we don't believe, in the ordinances. The good news is to date, you haven't had anybody that I'm aware of request anything that's not listed in those fees. Some sections of your ordinances refer to a rate schedule that's on file with the city clerk's office, which is technically my position. So some of these rates are, if they're not in the fee schedule, they're in the office on a rate sheet. But this one is the most glaring for right now, is you have technically two different rates for the same item.
Okay.
So again, the recommendation would be to modify, the NSF fee would be $25, to charge $25.
All right, I'll make a motion under chapter A600, subsection A600-1 fee schedule on 55-1 that the fee for a check return for insufficient funds be $25.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Do you have to do a roll call on that one?
No, you can just take well, we should take a roll call on that one because it's a recommendation to change what's in your ordinances.
Okay.
Okay,
Here.
all right.
Appleby.
Aye.
Aye.
Appleby, aye. Rasmussen?
Aye.
That motion carries. Okay, thank you.
All right, next one is discussion on ordinance 190-9 pit bulls.
This is brought before the committee by the chair.
Okay, so I went and did my research and I covered every city in Weyauwega County. And we were the only one that had a dog specific on ordinance for vicious dogs. Everybody else it's any dogs. And you'll see with some of them I put in were just to show you that when they wrote it, it was any dogs. are put through their whole ordinance things that they're going through. Some cities, like Manawa, they just have a small little thing on vicious dogs and animals. Green Bay was one city that I compared us with, because they were a little bit closer, and that was like the first one on your list. And Green Bay, with their dangerous dogs, it's any dog, and it says that throughout the whole thing. But as you can see, as they go on with it, there are certain things that they consider with it, and what happens for, like, if an animal attacks and so forth. And that's kind of how New London operates as well in their city. Weyauwega was the only one I tried getting on their website and trying to get their ordinance pulled up, but my computer would not let me print anything out. But they kind of have the same thing as New London. It's just any vicious dog. And then they have the requirements and the prohibits, like they have to be leashed and muzzled, and signs have to be put up, and police chief shall investigate every dog complaint and make a determination whether or not such dog is vicious. I found it interesting because, it's not dictating any certain dog, it's any dog. And if you read up on this, I've read a couple of things where the littler dogs are more vicious than the bigger dogs. Every dog is in that category to bite, but it seems like more of the littler dogs are causing a lot of problems too.
Sure. Jerry, where'd that ordinance generate from? Where they were species specific? You recall?
It was a long time ago, and the first rage of pit bulls being the evil dogs. We've never had the opportunity to enforce it just for pit bulls. The only vicious dog that I've dealt with was a German Shepherd, and it continually bit a person down in the mayor's neighborhood, and we had that dog. They had to put it down. But that was a German Shepherd, it wasn't a pit bull.
Yeah.
And there's a fair amount of them in town.
Any negative reports on them or calls on them that you've
Nothing
seen?
on anything biting. The only concern I have with an ordinance that specifically sets out a pit bull is who's going to say it's pit bull? And what type of pit bull and how much, because some are pit bulls and labs.
Yeah.
The ordinance we have though says, and I'll have to pull it back up, any type of pit bull in them, I do believe. So the matter, and as Attorney Kelney had discussed, if you're looking, I guess the thing you probably want to look at, if you want to bring this back up, is what are you trying to either prevent or control? Is it vicious dogs? Because if it is, Attorney Kelney is of the opinion, and I agree with him, that if you lay out a certain breed of dog, that's pretty definitive, and you can at least have a vet, either a vet or some type of an animal doctor prove what type of a breed a dog is. That's pretty black and white. Now, if you would leave it the other way, where you just deal with vicious dogs, then you invite in some gray area where people could say, well, my dog's not vicious, and there is no way to prove until something happens where, somebody's dog will bite somebody. And the question is, how do you deal with this? Is it, I don't know that there's a perfect way, but a straightforward way is to deal with the breeds. That's what you have for an ordinance now, and you've had it for, it seems like, quite a while. But if you're not going to enforce it, well, that's kind of another thing too. Then if we're going to have an ordinance that we don't enforce, should you even have an ordinance? Period. Because technically you do have one ordinance that specifies pit bulls. You have another one that talks about vicious animals.
And does the vicious animals ordinance cover the same areas of behavior that the pit bull ordinance does? Because I do not agree that the pit bull, in my opinion, should be singled out and picked on as a specific species on an issue like this. I think you can use a generalization on vicious animals with some serious defined criteria to determine viciousness and enforce it that way.
And I agree too, because looking at these other people with, you know, the other cities with their ordinances with the vicious dogs too, they lay it out. You know, it's any vicious dog, and then they have certain things that have to be followed. So it's like they're giving all dogs a chance, and they're giving all owners a chance to prove that their dog is a good dog. And these are the rules and what's gonna happen if your dog bites somebody or becomes vicious or, you know, attacks. Because a lot of them are your dog needs to stay in, you know, has to contain in your yard. When you're walking them, they need to be on a leash and you have to be full control of their dog at all times. You need to muzzle them if they're, you know, if they're known to nip or bite other people.
The problem is you're not giving people a chance. When you go to that type of an ordinance, you're putting the burden on the city to enforce the ordinance. So then the city has to figure out, well, what's a vicious or dangerous dog, and how else would you be able to prove that but something happens? Because nobody's going to keep a dog that they feel is dangerous. And if you ever have to question whether it's a vicious or dangerous dog, if somebody has it, obviously there's some level of they're okay with it, you know. And I'm not arguing for or against this. It's just when you select a breed of dog and control it that way, it's pretty straightforward. But when you don't, then it's
Dump the
not.
ordinance and let it become a civil matter. Don't get involved in it.
Yeah, and the ordinance we're looking at is, again, 199, and it's pit bulls and other dangerous animals. So actually, it's a subsection, it's number 3 within your dangerous animal ordinance. In a way, I mean, you have a problem in having this ordinance and never enforcing it, because if you would have enforced it, I'm sure you would have heard about it before now, you know.
Because we wouldn't have pit bulls in the city if we were enforcing it already.
I mean, I know what you're saying there as far as in respect to other dangerous animals, but
Mhm.
every paragraph in that thing mentions the word pit bull. So, as far as I'm concerned, 190-9 is totally generated towards the breed of pit bull.
Well, it says if you look at A1 and 2, which is the very first sections, it says keeping of animals prohibited. So it's talking about pit bulls and dangerous animals. Shall be unlawful to keep, harbor, own, or in any way possess within the corporate limits of the city of Weyauwega. Number 1 says any warm-blooded, carnivorous, or omnivorous, wild or exotic animal, including but not limited to non-human primates, raccoons, skunks, foxes, and wild and exotic cats. Number 2, it says it's illegal to have any animal having poisonous bites, which is probably spiders, those types of things, snakes, you know. And then it gets into the pit bull. The problem is number 3, I think it's just laid out probably incorrectly, because you'd think number 3 talks about pit bull dogs, and then it should be all subsections under there, but the rest of the ordinance talks about pit bulls that are illegal, and then it talks about pit bulls that are legal if they're registered. And then it says here, anybody that's got a registered pit bull has to provide proof to the police department that they have liability insurance that'll cover any problem. So in a way, it's saying, yeah, there might be something that happens, but let's make sure that whoever's got the pit bull's got enough insurance to cover it. $50,000 for bodily injury or death of any person harmed or damaged. I think the idea is going to have to be, how do you want to regulate vicious animals? Because I think that's why you have this here. And somebody at some point had decided that the pit bull was best regulated by singling them out.
I can tell you there was an issue years ago. That's how this basically got started.
What you can probably do, and one of the benefits of filming these meetings is that Attorney Kelly's able to watch the meetings. He's watched a couple of them, from what I understand, kind of on his own time, just because he's curious on what goes on. But if this is something that you want to refer to him, you could, if you want to take a look at modifying the ordinance. I know when he was here, you had the discussion that there never really was any direction on moving forward with changing it at all.
I would like to submit to our city attorney the information that Shaney has gathered on other ordinances on vicious animals and have him look at those in comparison to what we are trying to do here with this ordinance and see if there isn't a more amicable and generalization that can be put to this this ordinance
Okay.
that still covers what we want to cover, but yet in the same token does not pick out specific pet owners. Because I think you can get by with some definitions and generalizations on this ordinance without picking on the pit bull.
Is it a motion to refer it? What I've,
I'll make the motion to
Okay.
refer chapter 190-9, pit bulls and other dangerous animals, to the city attorney, city attorney for review against the existing ordinances that Shaney Appleby has gathered for review.
okay,
I'll second that.
okay. You don't need a roll call on that, but you can just take a vote if you'd like.
Before we do, Mike,
Yes.
Mike, what's your opinion on that, based on your knowledge of having that issue that this all came from?
Well, it's, the
What do you
other
think?
thing we gotta look at is, we can't, because somebody came now and complained because they have this, we can't just go and change the ordinance, because we're gonna have other people coming for other issues and saying, well, hey, you're gonna change that, you can change this, and, like I said, I believe there was a issue years ago with this. I don't remember exactly how it went, but that was one of the reasons why it was put in here. Because there was some places where they were just tied to the outside of the building, not in a cage, and they would, when you would walk by there, they would pull pretty good on their chain, and we had people that were complaining about it, scared to walk by there. And if I remember right, that's how it got started, but if there's some way that it can be changed so it's not putting it directly to that particular dog, and we say, that all of them have to be in a pen, all of them have to be on a leash when they're out for a walk. If it's up to the owner, to put a muzzle on it if they feel that thing is, because if it bites someone, it's going to be their fault.
The animal needs to be under the control of the owner. The owner is
Right.
ultimately
But-
responsible, for
Right.
the animal's behavior.
Right, but sometimes you don't have the owner, you have one of their children operating the dog, and they can't control them. That's where this whole thing came before.
Well, then that still reflects
And
back on the owner, though, by
and that-
allowing the children to handle the dog.
And I believe the other thing, the reason it got so picky on this is because I believe at that time, we asked, the chief at that time, we asked him, how are you going to verify a vicious dog? So if Jerry, how are you gonna tell us that's a vicious dog? Or, when you're standing by the owner and she says, no, it's not,
Right, that's the whole issue, really, it's not.
right,
Whose version of vicious? The owner might say it's not a vicious dog, but boy, we've had 3 bites.
Well, and there's a criteria. The criteria's gotta be itemized out on the ordinance as to what will determine
Right.
the ruling for a vicious dog. I mean, obviously, if he bites strangers 3 times, that could easily be a criteria, even 1 time, but then it'd have to be looked at as what were the circumstances behind it? Why did the dog? Where did the dog? Where was the dog? I mean, there's some things that needed to be defined, but you get a dog biting people 3 times, I'd be upset about that.
We
And
can-
you're
yeah.
right, that, with determining that, because you can take any dog, really. Some dogs don't like kids when they're young, and they get around kids, or they have never been around kids.
They're not
I know
socialized,
Cocker
yeah.
Spaniels are that way.
They're high strung.
They're high-strung dog. They are okay with older people, adults, but you get some kids that come along and they don't like kids and screaming noises, and they turn. You know, but,
Then the owner shouldn't put him in that environment.
right,
I really am strict on putting the burden of responsibility on the owner. I accept that responsibility as a lab owner, and everyone else that owns an animal should also assume that same responsibility.
I'd agree with that, and just to put a quick note in there, when we look at the reason why you had a request to come forward to even review this, it was because somebody in town had a pit bull, and someone else filed a complaint saying that they have a pit bull, they didn't like it in the neighborhood, and we have an ordinance that says you can't have a pit bull. Well, in the meantime, it's my understanding that that owner doesn't have the dog anymore. He had given the pit bull up now, so
Okay.
so in theory, the complaint is sort of resolved, the initial complaint that brought this up to even talk about it, but looking at the idea of a neighbor doesn't like or feels threatened on some level by her neighbor's dog. When we have an ordinance that says you can't have pit bulls, it's pretty straightforward that you can't have a pit bull. If we don't have this ordinance and we call it a vicious dog, the neighbor complains and says, well, there's a vicious dog in the neighborhood. The owner is gonna say, no, it's fine, not a vicious dog. Even though, and I totally get what you're saying with, well, it should be on the dog owner, it's their responsibility. In that scenario, if you get rid of the pit bull ordinance, the burden is on the city. Because you have somebody complaining, doesn't like the dog, the owner says, well, no, the dog's fine. And that's, you're probably
away-
gonna wanna have the city attorney
Definitely.
weigh in on that for sure, but the problem is, with the ordinance you have now, a layperson can sort of enforce that. But when you get rid of it, you're almost always going to want to have the city attorney involved whenever there's a vicious animal complaint. And especially if the dog owner and the complainant don't agree on what a vicious dog is, because that's really the key, is proving, if you have a vicious dog, yes, absolutely, it's up to you to remedy that, but if you
But
don't
there has to
feel
be
you have one.
criteria to base it against
Right.
too, though. So you gotta be smart enough to put the right information in the ordinance.
Right, but so we're clear, the burden is gonna be on the city though in this situation, so. But that's why you have the city attorney, and if you review, you send it to him, he's already aware because he was at that meeting when we started talking about it.
True, but what liability does the city have by having or not having this ordinance?
How are you going to resolve the complaint when a neighbor calls and says, my dog has a vicious dog next door? That's where the problem is. I'm not gonna say problem, that's where the difficulty is for the city.
yes.
Because you'll have usually you have the ordinances to try to give you some clarity on, somebody has a complaint, how do you resolve it?
You can't have a case by case.
Well, you would, but if, in this case, it says your ordinance even says, it lays out Staffordshire Bull Terrier, American Pit Bull Terrier, American Staffordshire Terrier, and then it says any dog which has the appearance and characteristics of being predominantly of the breed of any of those pit bulls. So, sort of a blanket statement there. And that you can look, because that's where the burden is going to be on the dog owner to prove that it's not one of these things. But when you just say vicious dog, usually you're gonna probably end up with a bite or something, and it might be okay to deal with it that way, but You just have to realize that a vicious dog might not be identified until something happens, and then at that point, it's probably going to be put down, so it's kind of a moot thing anyway at that point. But in speaking with Attorney Kelly on this, that's sort of where he's gonna be at, is that it raises the level of difficulty in identifying what's a vicious dog. But that doesn't mean that that's wrong though either. You can
Yeah.
still do it.
Can I just ask a question? So, going through all this and trying to resolve this and make it a better thing for everybody as far as an ordinance, if we were to keep this pit bull ordinance as is and Jerry enforces it, but then the next day we get a phone call saying that somebody's Rottweiler or Doberman did exactly what we are trying to make reference to all, are we gonna have to now then come back instead of putting just any pit bull dog, are we gonna have to go any pit bull dog, Doberman, Rottweiler, every time somebody has a
That's
vicious
why I'm
pet?
thinking we should generalize this and say vicious animal and lay the groundwork for criteria that we
'Cause I-
base that determination off from.
Yeah, it'll help. It's not going to make the determination though. It'll help. You know. And that's okay. It's okay. Yeah, I mean, in that case, any dog that's not a pit bull, then it already falls on that burden of what's a vicious animal.
Cause I'm just going by what I've read and like all the cities kinda lay forward, you know, they have any dog and then this is the steps that are gonna be followed,
A lot of
Yeah.
them do. The ones you
You know,
looked at did.
yeah.
Yeah.
you know.
Somehow they came up with this language though, and I know the city here didn't come up with that on its own, I'm sure.
No,
you
it
know.
isn't. I don't think so
But-
either.
And that's okay. You know, you haven't had, as far as I know, you haven't had pit bull problems since you've had the ordinance, because you'd know about it,
Right,
you know.
and
Isn't
that's
this ordinance
just,
copied from someplace in Milwaukee?
South Milwaukee, I believe.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep. Usually it's you have one situation and then the ordinance gets changed to apply to that, like you say, Rottweiler or whatever. But,
Did this mainly start from someone not having a registered dog before?
well, it started just as I explained that somebody made a complaint about a pit bull living next door to them, knowing that it's not a registered dog, or that it's likely not a registered dog, and knowing that our ordinance says you can't have a pit bull in town. Because when you had this ordinance put in, it allowed for people to register every pit bull in the city at that point. So every pit bull that was in town when you put the ordinance in was legal as long as they kept registering them, but in this case, this one was not registered.
And you got rid of it.
Yep.
Correct?
Yep. But not because of any complaint, I don't think. I think it was just a matter of the idea of a dog, any kind of dog, having that. So you have a motion to refer it to the city attorney for comment and review? That's probably the best way to go.
Yep.
there was a second on it too, right?
Yep. Yep. Motion by Rasmus, second by Appleby.
And just a little funny comment on this, as we were passing bags out for scouts on Saturday, one of the little boys with us that went up to a yard to put a bag on got chased out by a wiener dog.
Mm.
And then Caitlin, as she was trying to get to the next house, that same dog came running right out at her, and the owner thought it was funny. And Caitlin didn't find it so much funny. After that, she didn't want to get out anymore at any houses that had dogs out.
All kinds of dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Have a motion and a second. I take a vote. All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Such other matters as authorized by law, I don't have anything else.
Do you, Scott?
No, I do not.
If you can take a motion to adjourn the ordinance committee?
I will make a motion to adjourn the ordinance committee at 6:39.
A second?
All in favor?
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye. There you go. Good
You're
job.
adjourned. Good job.